Hi, everyone. I'm Diana Sorobi, and I've been teaching high school for 15 years now. The last 7 years of my career, I've spent teaching English as an additional language at international schools in Ho Chi Minh City. And the students I work with typically aren't beginners to English. They're students who can communicate and it's comprehensible what they say, but they're often needing help to expand their vocabulary, apply more precise vocabulary in their speech and in their writing in order to be more persuasive, in order to make their language more sophisticated. And of course, there's a lot of work with refining grammar. At any rate, I've noticed, as I imagine all of you have too, that some students come in at the high school level with a little bit of language support, perhaps just for a year, maybe two, and they soar, quickly attaining the highly academic language goals that we set for them. They use the feedback that's provided, and they don't make the same mistakes over and over again. And then there are others, those kids that stay stuck as long-term English learners, leaving them and their parents frustrated and demoralized. And sometimes that can be what harms their motivation. So, I think it was February, earlier this year anyway, I had the privilege to attend another online conference at which Dr. Catlin Tucker was the keynote speaker. And one question she asked really resonated with me. So she asked, are we as educators really taking time to understand our students? How are we building time to get to know these people that we're designing the learning experiences for? And I've always found this important, but as things have gotten busy, especially as we're, in my context, just back into physical school after being virtual for an entire semester at the beginning of this year, the scramble is real, and it's easy to lose sight of our people. So I really liked the analogy she used. She compared teachers to architects. We are designing a learning experience. And if you think about the work of an architect, they really have to know their clients. They have to know the structural environment they're working in. There's a lot of variables. We do too, because each one of our students is different. So in this presentation today, my goals are to help you as teachers help your long-term English learners get unstuck and push past those language plateaus so that they can attain those high standards of sophisticated language. The two keys, in my opinion, to getting this right is to build relationships with our students and understand them as individuals, and that will help us help them learn better self-regulation. So I'm going to drop some resources in the chat during the live Zoom, and I'll link a resource toolkit, and I'll explain what you'll find in that toolkit. And they're basically documents for you to copy and adapt as you see fit. First, goal setting is how I start each semester. And I've used this template. It's just a Google Doc. We have an overarching goal, break it down into smaller steps. And there's a lot of description of what a good goal, which I'll explain, needs to be a mastery goal. So if their goal is to get an A or to exit EAL services, that's not going to lead to long-term success. If their goal, on the other hand, is to be able to give a persuasive speech using rhetorical devices in front of their class, that is attainable because we're focusing on the skills. And we can chunk that into subset skills that make up that complex language task. I just have these images here. Obviously, this isn't a resource for you, but it reflects the reflective and metacognitive thinking we need to promote in our students. A lot of that comes in one-on-one conferences, but this can be very time consuming, and it's hard to get in one-on-one conferences frequently enough in a class of, most of my classes have around 15 students, which is a nice number, but still to have 15 individual meaningful conversations in a lesson can be difficult. So I often try to just seize opportunities when kids are working independently to just go over and quietly chat with someone. Hey, how's it going? I remember this is the goal you set. How are we? What are you seeing? Are there any resources that I can suggest or help you with? But because it's not realistic to have those conversations all the time, and some students feel more comfortable to reflect in writing, I also have my students journal. And this is a practice I've had them do for ages, um, because it builds their writing skill and allows me to have an opportunity to provide more feedback on more writing, which is always a good thing. But we can kill two birds with one stone by asking questions that have them reflect on how they're progressing toward their goals. And sometimes when I want to make it simpler or less less formal than that, I have a Google form. So I'm sharing with you the template to these documents in the way I use them in my classes. Feel free to make copies, adjust, adapt, do as you like with them or not at all. Up to you. I liked this quote, and as I read it, I want you to think of some students that really nail this, the kids that have all these learning skills together that you are currently teaching. So, good self regulators set better learning goals, implement more effective learning strategies, monitor and access their goal progress better, establish a more productive environment for learning, seek assistance more often, and expend more effort and persist better. We all know these kids, they have it figured out. They understand, they come into our classes, they take the instruction, they take the feedback, and they sail with it. And now I want you to think about students who aren't mastering some of these learning skills. I can think of about the same number who have this down without my help and who really struggle with one or many of these components. So, in such cases, nothing is more important than a strong teacher student relationship. Regularly communicating with the student, with their parents, their families, is essential to really figuring out the key to help get them motivated. So sometimes the issue could be something with their motivation. So it's important to understand why they want to learn this language and why they're attending your particular school and why they're taking what they are. If it's beyond the student's choice, often that's one of the issues that we have to help them find a way to reconcile and find some control. Choice is an important factor in student motivation. Um, there are certain stressors in the environment that could be impacting their learning. Could have stressors at home, conflicts with friends, illness, even something so simple as the temperature within our classroom environment, clutter. These can all impact students' ability to self regulate. So, thinking about these things and having conversations with students to help them become aware is one of the important first steps. Um, so, this is kind of how the progression of building self regulation happens in my classrooms. First, I have to understand students' motivation and why it may have stalled. Help facilitate goal setting. So I start with that template that I've shared with you, and then I need to remember what the overarching goals that students have set are too. So I'll take a class roster list and just write one word that sums it up for me so I can have a quick reference. I like it on paper. You can keep that digitally anywhere, but I find that's also very helpful because it really communicates a sense of caring about students' goals when we can remember them. Regular conversations and descriptive feedback, not just good job. I know you all know this, but okay, you're using the continuous verb tense too frequently. Here is why we would use continuous, and here are the places where it doesn't belong. Here's some practice to work on that. You want to get better at verb tenses. This is what you're doing wrong. And finally, a mastery focus. So, as I mentioned, goals need to be a certain type of goals in order for students to succeed. And I've provided the presentation that I I start with my students in student-friendly language, what is a mastery orientation? So, in a nutshell, this means that goals should drive towards improving a skill, aiming for good grades, winning, or some other kind of extrinsic reward doesn't lead to good self regulation. It's not connected to the learning. And we all know these students who are like, I want to get an A, I want to get an A, or my parents will be mad at me if I don't get 90%. But they lose sight of what that high grade represents in terms of the skill level. So, providing a lot of exemplars for students is also something that's very helpful, allowing them to see what, a WIDA level 6 is, what a mastery example of an essay or a speech by a student their age, if possible, looks like. So save student work, exemplary especially, because that also boosts their confidence. When you ask them, hey, this was really great. Do you mind if I use it and show my students in the future? They'll be very proud in most cases. So if you click on this link or in the toolkit that I've shared, that's a presentation that walks it through in student-friendly language, what this mastery orientation is. And I start with that before I even get them to set goals. So this would be something in the first week of learning that I've started to incorporate into my practice. I didn't do this a couple years ago. And at the conclusion of this, I'll show you that I'm finding it's getting good results. So, components of good self regulation in our students include this mastery orientation. They're setting SMART goals, reasonable, attainable, time bound, etc. They have choices. If our classes are very prescriptive and students don't have any flexibility, they're less likely to be interested and engaged and less likely to be motivated. They need to have an openness to feedback. And one way as educators we can help is by providing feedback in a non threatening way. So don't correct them in front of the whole class and embarrass them. I know we all know this, but sometimes we forget. So it's important to be discreet and private because these goals are very intimately private for the students. Their language goals are different and they're not things that they typically want to share with their friends, but we can facilitate when they have a goal, how to chunk it down into little attainable bits that they can get the satisfaction of ticking off and feeling accomplished. And that feeling of accomplishment leads to a continual accomplishment. But often with the students who are stuck, they feel that the goals are so far out of sight that they can't get that sense of self efficacy. So we need to help them find the little steps. This is a complicated process. So start with getting them to set a goal. I use that template. Really, any format could work. Some people put it up on a chart in the classroom. Lots and lots of different ways. Help them chunk that goal into manageable steps that they can feel. They can feel the satisfaction of checking off. Then you want to review how they're progressing as the semester goes along and you get into other content by holding individual conferences, by asking them to journal. And one of the most powerful things we can do as educators is to notice if they get stuck pretty promptly and initiate a private but frank conversation. Sometimes parents will need to be involved if the student doesn't pick up their socks on their own. But this is something that with experience as a teacher, I've gotten better at. If I notice that a student has stagnated, I name it. I call them out and I identify that, hey, I noticed that you're still making subject verb agreement errors. I've provided these resources. Here is what it is. You can identify it in a worksheet or something, but you can't correct it in your own speech or your own writing. Let's make a reference sheet that you keep in your binder or your notebook or something. And really, you've got to start checking for this. This has been a year that you've been at this. It's time to move on. And I find that those conversations are often enough of a nudge to propel the students along. This was a resource I came across in one of the scholarly articles I read during my master's. So, supporting learner self regulation involves clarifying what a good performance is, facilitating self assessment, providing specific descriptive feedback, teacher and peer dialogue, building those little chunks, and helping our students feel a sense of accomplishment that they're moving along the progression to their ultimate goal, helping them, give them resources. They're students, they don't understand how to fix these errors unless we give them a lot of guided practice and providing feedback. Now, if all of these things don't work, then we could be dealing with something bigger, and it's time to involve a bigger team. So, in some cases, students get stuck, and there could be some sort of learning difficulty that we need to address. So, in that case, you bring in your learning support or school psychologist or whatever you resources you have on your team and collaborate. Collaboration in the really challenging cases is very helpful. As mentioned before, our feedback needs to focus on little things that are attainable. Like if you have a student that makes pretty much every kind of grammatical error you can think of, let's focus on one or two at a time because it's not attainable for them to fix every pattern. So provide feedback, monitor, and once they've mastered one thing, then you can move on to the next. But really, waiting for that mastery has been one of the most effective parts of this. Students have to be able to see the mastery themselves, and so does the teacher. So if they haven't, it's not time to move on. And sometimes it feels frustratingly long how long that takes. And that's when those conversations and collaboration with a broader team need to come in. Some of the resources I've encountered that were really great came from Dr. Stuart Shanker and the Merit Center. I'm going to jump ahead to show you this. It's a great website with tons of tools for self regulation. But Shanker did a talk in which he describes how stressors impact our brain. So, the brain has all of these wonderful functions, but our fight or flight instincts in the what he calls the red brain, when that's activated, when students aren't feeling safe and secure in their environment. So if there's perhaps bullying going on at school, or in the midst of a pandemic and we're worried about our safety or security, or we have not been able to go to school for several months. All of these are realities that our students have been dealing with that'll impact their motivations. I experienced it personally for the first time in the last year where I just couldn't, I'd sit there toggling aimlessly on the tabs because I was feeling overwhelmed and incredibly stressed by all of the events going on. We went through really strict lockdowns here in Vietnam. And so there could be a lot of things beyond our control, but letting students know that we care and giving them a place to talk or just acknowledge that, hey, this is tough and you'll get through can really help. Because when they're in that red brain mode, learning's not going to happen. And so, if that's something that's been activated for a particular reason that they're not feeling secure, that's all they're seeking at that moment is security. And so, grammar falls very low down the list of priorities. So, we need to help them make their environment feel safe again in order for that learning to happen. So, I've shown you the Merit Center. There's tons of great resources there. Oops, didn't want to click on that yet. This is one of the resources connected to their team as well. Susan Hopkins works for them, and she just kind of illustrates the multiplying effect of stressors here. Many high school students are grappling with anxiety. Their anxiety could be related to grades. Another reason that coaching them into mastery orientation is helpful. Not attaining the desired grade can be a really demoralizing experience for students. They may become fixated in this cycle of anxiety, or their anxiety could be related to, fear of judgment from their peers. That's a very real thing for teenagers. And that can also trigger the red brain and prevent students from really accessing any of the great learning and feedback that we're providing. We need to be aware that this could be going on by really making sure that our students feel our class is a safe place, that we are people they can trust and share with, and by celebrating when they do propel and when they do succeed. So don't beat around the bush. Tackle those hard conversations head on, but of course in a private way. Some students are more likely to reveal things in a journal. Some are more likely to share with you if you just pull them outside of the classroom and say, hey, what's going on? I noticed you really haven't made any improvements. And depending on the circumstance, it can be super helpful to involve the parents. I had a student earlier this year who was just crippled with anxiety. We were working on a debate unit in her English class, and just for her to read the statement of her position, we affirm this resolution, sent her into tears. And I was really concerned because obviously her fear of taking any risks with her language was holding her back. And in this case, this has been a remarkable turnaround. But I started first with her, but of course, she was in this like very upset state, and I had to give her space. And after that, I reached out and initiated a parent meeting with her father, myself, and the co-teacher whose class this happened in. And I've never seen a turnaround. I mean, it doesn't happen in all cases, but this girl now has just like somehow a switch turned, and her father deserves an award because the conversation that he had with her helped her realize that she's not going to progress unless she takes some risk. If she never speaks in class, then she's missing out on the environment of a classroom. And unbelievably, just a month later, she's speaking in front of the class for 5 minutes nonstop and not crying. In fact, her language skills are coming out to be much stronger than I had initially assessed because she wasn't sharing anything. Finally, I don't accept excuses. And I don't accept students giving themselves excuses either. No, I can't. I'm not this. If the strategy doesn't work, then we try something different. But it's important that when we set goals, we use language that affirms, right? Instead of, I'm going to try to, no, I'm going to, I will demonstrate. That's the language we need to see in a goal rather than, I might try to sort of kind of do this. And it's important. I'll give my students feedback on that if their goals have that tentative language. Nope, you are going to do this. It might take time, it will take effort, but they are. So, overall, after implementing this in my classes, I find that students are more engaged and invested in their learning and the reasons why we do particular work. They understand the goals and they understand that they're aiming to master skills. Students are more aware and of productive and destructive behaviors. So, not speaking in class, that's not helping you develop your language skills. Not trying more complicated vocabulary, even if you get it wrong, that's not helping. So they've become more confident in their ability to fail and recover. They find their own ways to self motivate, and they're taking greater responsibility for their results. And this has been a very challenging year in my context, with over half of the year online. And yet, and it could be total coincidence, I have more students exiting EAL services than previously, despite these disruptions to their learning. So I'm going to keep incorporating goal setting into my practice. There's some of the references that I've made reference to. And that's it. So you'll find those tools that I use. It's pretty rudimentary, but it really centers on all of these conversations that I have through multiple modalities to get to know my students and what they want to achieve, and to make sure that they understand that that needs to focus on skill mastery. I hope this has been helpful.